Welcome to Amplify the People, the podcast about the people shaping the future and how we show up for the communities right in front of us. I'm your host, Orieta Estrada. Every episode, I sit down with someone doing the quiet, stubborn work of building something better, and we trace it back to where it started. Today's guest does that work on a few fronts. Joe Toolan is the director of the Justicia y Equidad Fund at Green Latinos. Since 2022, his team has moved $23 million to environmental organizations and the leaders doing the work to build a more just future. He studied geographical sciences at the University of Maryland, College Park, with a focus on environmental systems and natural resource management, and he holds an executive certificate in nonprofit management from Georgetown. He's a transracial adoptee, born in Guatemala, raised on the Chesapeake, and now he's running to represent Anne Arundel County's District 6, which, if he wins, would make him the first Latino and the first openly gay member of that county council. And he is the only candidate in the race with a direct environmental background. His platform centers on affordability, environmental protection, public education, public safety, and transparency. But before any of the titles, Joe is someone who fell in love with the water as a kid. So that's where we start. All right. So, welcome.
Hi.
I haven't seen you in a little while. It's been like a couple months. We saw each other in March, right?
Mm-hmm. But it has been a couple months, and I don't know. It's so good to see you on the screen, and I love your energy. So I always feel like,
thank you.
I don't know. It's always good to see you.
Likewise. No, I feel similarly towards you, and you definitely have such a grounding presence, and I'm just really excited to have this opportunity to just have a conversation about who you are and what brings you to this podcast. So I know that you grew up crabbing on the Chesapeake Bay in Pasadena, right? Pasadena, Maryland, right? Because California doesn't get to have the only Pasadena, okay?
They don't.
They do not.
And Pasadena, Maryland, it's very small, right? And I'll say Pasadena and people will be like, really? And I'm like, I think you're thinking about the wrong Pasadena. But yeah, it's like a waterfront. I mean, not all of it's waterfront, but outdoors and environment are a big part of growing up there, I think, for a lot of kids.
The Chesapeake Bay is the third largest estuary in the world, right? And I think it's the biggest one in our country, right?
Yes. Yep. I think it's the biggest one in North America.
The biggest one in North America, even. Okay.
Yep.
Maybe you can tell us a little bit about time and place on the bay.
Yeah, so I'm a 90s kid. I would say my earliest memories of the Chesapeake Bay were in the 90s, although I was little. And my parents would say, from being a baby, they took me out onto the bay. It was a baby in a bucket, basically, where they would have me with them on their boat. And, they had a 19-foot, it's called a privateer. That's the name of the boat. And it's what we would use to go crabbing and fishing, right? So 19-foot boat in the boating world, it's not too big. It's not too small. And I just remember when we would go out onto the water, we lived off of a creek that went out into a river that then went out into the bay. And in the creek, it was always very still, very glassy, the water. You could kind of see it looked flat right across the entire waterway. And I would remember every time we would get in the boat, my dad would start the engine to the boat and you would just smell a little bit of like gas burning in a way that you don't smell often. And then we would kind of make our way out. And in the creek, you couldn't drive too fast. You didn't want to create a wake and kind of rock all of the other boats on the side of the water. And then once we got out into the creek, my dad would like say, okay, are you all ready? Right. And then we would just go really fast. Right. And as a kid, it felt so freeing. Right. Like there was this sense of, the wind is hitting my face, my worries are gone, and you kind of just are. You were like this little boat in this larger environmental space. And I think that that's what really inspired me from a young age to want to protect the environment. And I recognize that I grew up in a family where I was very lucky to have that type of access to the water, right? There's a lot of people that don't have that. And it made me feel very connected in some way to the environment, right? I think that if you think about some of the work that I do now, right, you have kids that live in cities and maybe don't even get green space that often. But when you're in it, you feel connected. So we would go crabbing, we would go fishing. Sometimes we would go and just find a beach to go, lay on. And that was really a lot of the time during the summer for me growing up.
Thank you so much for sharing that and taking us there. At what point did you realize that your love for the outdoors and the environment would lead you towards a career?
Yeah, I mean, that's a little bit of a difficult question. I was thinking about this a lot because I think for a long time, I didn't even know that doing environmental work was a career that you could get into. I think that I was taught, as I think a lot of us are, that there are certain careers that maybe pay more or that are more desirable, including, being a doctor or being a lawyer or, anything like that. And so I did know that I was really interested in the sciences of some sort. And so, you know, by the time I was in middle school, I was in like the STEM club. That was the thing at the time. You could go after school, and I remember, we would go and like build rockets that we would shoot out in the middle of the afternoon after school ended. And that was really cool to me. That was like the thing.
A quick pause to share two things close to my heart. First, applications are open right now for the Birders Fund Scholarship. The Birders Fund is part of Amplify the Future, and it exists to open doors for people who want to connect with nature and the outdoors, but haven't always had access. If that's you or someone you know, the season is open, and we'd love your application. Everything you need is on the Amplify the Future website, www.amplifythefuture.org. And second, a little preview of what's next. On the next episode of Amplify the People, I'm joined by Alex Moss of Foxhaven Organic Farm. We get into community, nature, and what it really takes to grow something that lasts. You won't want to miss it. Now, back to my conversation with Joe Toolan. What you said before about depending on who you're growing up around, you're kind of pushed towards careers or vocations. I was being pushed towards vocation. And when I expressed that I wanted to be a biologist, I was told there's no money in that. I mean, and they weren't wrong. Okay. But at the same time, like, not everything we do needs to be for money.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it was very similar in some ways where I grew up. And I think, and I didn't share this yet, but I think it's important when I talk about my story, right? I'm adopted. So I was born in Guatemala. I was raised in Pasadena by a white family, right? So had access to some of the resources that a lot of other Latinos unfortunately don't have access to. And I say that because I think that even for Latino families, right, there's a lot of people where their parents will say, we worked hard to like come to this country, give you a new life, give you opportunity. And when you say you want to work in the environmental field, they're like, why? Why do you want to work outside? Why do you want to, do this when we came here to like give you a different opportunity, right? And I've heard that from people. And the STEM program, when I went through it, I don't think it was brand new to the county, but it was pretty new in the part of the county that I grew up in. So I went to North County High School, and I think it was its third or fourth year running a STEM program as part of a high school curriculum. And I was interested in so much of it. I think for a while I thought I was going to go be a meteorologist. I'm fascinated with weather. And
I love weather. I didn't know this about you.
Yes,
oh my gosh.
yes.
Every time we talk, I just like you more and more and more. Like there's just no ceiling. You are so wonderful.
Yes.
We have to I could talk about the weather. Like I love it. I mean, it tells me everything, how my body feels. Do I need to water my plants? What kind of birds might be in the area? It's everything.
It is.
It's everything.
And I really thought I was going to go to school to be a meteorologist. And I think as soon as I realized how much physics and chemistry go into telling the weather, I was like, never mind. I don't want to do this. But I did. I remember one of our projects in high school was career like research, right? Like how much money would you make? What's the market for these jobs? And, I remember reaching out to one of the weathermen in the Baltimore area. I think it's Tom Tasselmeyer. I could be wrong, but I was like, I'm a high school kid. I'm doing this project. Can you share anything about, your career? And I remember him saying, meteorologists, they don't make that much money unless you become famous, like Al Roker on TV or something like that. Or Jim Cantori, like the famous weather people that we know. But Penn State is one of the best schools for meteorology. I got accepted there, thought about going there, but, I don't think I knew exactly what I wanted to do. And then my senior year of high school, I was in an environmental science class. It was AP Environmental Science. And I remember we started learning particularly about Chesapeake Bay issues, because we talked a lot about general environmental issues, but as soon as you started tying it to location, to where I was familiar with, to where I grew up, it like clicked in my head, like, oh, these issues directly affect, the things that I grew up caring about. And I remember having a conversation with my teacher, and gosh, I don't even remember her name. I just remember her face, and I remember this conversation. But I said, like, I really like this, but like, I never thought about environmental science as like a career, right? And she was like, I can tell you really are fascinated with these subjects, right? Like, you're doing great in class. You do really care about the issues. And so, you should look into it, right? Like, anything can be a career if you want it to be. And so I kind of felt like I had a decision to make. I could go to one of the 4-year schools that accepted me for meteorology, or I could spend a little more time trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And I think in general, we ask 18-year-olds to decide what they want to do for the rest of their life. It's kind of crazy, but
it's a little crazy.
But so I decided actually to not go to any of the 4-year universities, and I went to community college for 2 years. And
hey, community college!
Yes,
I'm a community college kid. Yes,
and it was exactly what I needed, because what it let me do is get the basic classes in that I needed to get no matter where I went. And then also tailor some of the classes, particularly to environmental stuff. So, I took biology. I actually was a tutor in biology at community college for other people because I guess I really love biology. I took a botany class. I took an environmental science class and learned about plants, got to look at them under the microscope. And
I love school. I want to be in school forever.
yes,
I just want to enroll. Like my retirement plan is just school. I'm just going to enroll at the community college, audit all the classes, and just learn and read. I mean,
yeah.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
And I fell in love, right? Like I was just like, this is what I can do. I remember I took a geomorphology class and we got to go out in the river and do all the measurements about stream banks. And
what's a geomorphology? I don't even know what what do those words together mean?
Yeah. So geo is like geography and morphology is like how it moves and how it changes and how it morphs. And so it's basically the study of how rivers or landscapes change over time. So, we went into that class and we were focused on rivers, right? How do rivers change? How do they meander? How do you determine how much they're shifting over time? And we got to go down, like I said, into the rivers and do measurements. What's the stream bank height? How tall is the water? How quick is it moving? Like all of those things. And I was like, this is what I want to do. So I decided to transfer to University of Maryland College Park. And I had to pick environmental science and policy or environmental science and technology. Those are the two that they offered. And I picked policy, which looking back was not the right choice. And I remember in particular, I sat in an environmental law class. And at the time, I hated environmental law. I hated it. I was sitting there I have to remember all of these court cases and the dates and what they said. And ironically, I'm campaigning now and we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute, but I met the mother of the teacher that I had, the professor that I had for that class recently. And she was like, oh, my daughter is an environmental law person and her name is Joanna Goger. And I was like, why does that name sound so familiar? And she was like, oh, well, she doesn't practice anymore, but she teaches at University of Maryland. And I was like, oh my God, she was my professor while I was there. And, but that class, ironically, is the class that made me realize that law and policy was not necessarily what I wanted to do. And now we've come full circle because I'm getting back into policy now, right? That's the whole thing. But I ended up, my degree is actually in geography with a concentration of environment systems and natural resources management. And what I'll say really quickly about geography is that I loved the connection between humans and the environment, right? So we had classes about how humans impact the natural world, how I had a whole class on how migration affects our economies and affects the environment that we live in. And you can talk to a lot of environmental scientists too, and they'll tell you, I got into this because I thought I could be in the woods and study animals or whatever. But you can't study animals or the environment and how it changes without talking about how we as humans impact the environment and the world that we live in. And so that connection for me made it real and made me really want to dig into that as my career. And that's kind of how I got into my professional space.
Amazing. This is a great place for us to shift into the career work that you have done and where you're moving into. The Justicia y Equidad Fund has moved
$23 million
in grants to communities tackling climate change, clean energy, and conservation over the course of your tenure.
$23 million.
Could you talk a little bit about what that looks like on the ground?
Yeah. So I have spent most of my professional career in philanthropy, actually. But nonprofit philanthropy, it's a little bit different than family philanthropy, where they get to decide who gets the money, right? And I have my own thoughts about family philanthropy that I won't get into, but nonprofit philanthropy really is designed by the people for the people. And so I say that because a lot of the work that I bring and the lens I bring is how do we get more community voices to help make the decisions about how grants are made and who has access to resources. And so that's really at the core of what I do. And what does that look like? I mean, it looks like so many different things over the past few years. We have done programs that focus on things like oyster restoration. So have gotten to fund some innovative oyster harvesting techniques, some new oyster cages and traps that are designed to make life for watermen easier, and really like testing out new things in that space. The first program I ever managed was a community tree planting program right here in Anne Arundel County. And one of the first grants that I managed was led by the Watershed Stewards Academy. So one of the watershed stewards here in Anne Arundel County applied for a community tree planting grant at her church, Woods Memorial Presbyterian Church in Severna Park. And we got to get trees and volunteers to come out and just plant trees to green their campus of their faith-based organization. And a lot of faith-based organizations are really interested in doing environmental work now. And it makes sense. And I will say, a lot of faith-based organizations, they're big churches. They might have big parking lots that are really only used once or twice a week. And so how do we work with churches, right, to be a little bit more environmentally friendly? How do we work with those groups to reduce their footprint on the environment? It also means money to projects that you might not think about when you think about grant making in the Chesapeake region as a whole. We've done projects with groups like the Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay to do outreach and engagement in Pennsylvania to Plain Sect or Amish and Mennonite farmers around regenerative agriculture and, practices that help protect the environment while also protecting the way of living of these people that, I think are a little bit different than what the rest of us think about. We currently, and what I'm doing right now, is focused on urban tree planting and urban greening work. And really the goal is to make sure that no matter where you live, there are green spaces and trees available. And, we know in cities in the summer, especially here in Maryland, it gets humid, it gets hot. And if you have to walk around and there's no shade or no cover anywhere, it's unbearable. And so the work that I do right now is really focused on getting trees in places that really need it. And the thing I'll say about that work is that we're doing this in partnership, right? We're doing this with a group called the Tree Equity Alliance. And there's bipartisan support for this work because even in Florida, you're going to have Republican mayors that say, this part of my city has shade and it's cooler, and this part of my city has none. And so it's important to build those partnerships when you're doing this work.
For sure. Everybody wants to stay cool when it's blazing hot outside. Joe, you had mentioned the term, I think you said frontline community. Can you help define that term for the audience and for myself, please?
Yeah. So frontline communities are really communities that you would consider on the front lines, or the first who are feeling the impacts of climate change, environmental injustices, air pollution, water pollution, all of those things that are kind of disproportionately affecting different people. Quite often in cities, that is Black and Brown communities in particular, or white communities, even queer and LGBTQ people tend to live in those kind of areas that tend to be forgotten about, right? Like I think of it quite often as areas that do not get the resources that they need to protect them from climate change and environmental injustices in our spaces.
Thank you. So essentially communities who don't have the resources to fight back against whoever shows up in the neighborhood promising XYZ at the cost of their life potentially.
Yeah.
You are running for Anne Arundel County Council in District 6, which includes the city of Annapolis, Crownsville, and Millersville. Did I get that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So, like, how does that even work? How do you arrive there? And I know so much has happened for you in the past, like, 6 days, even.
It has been crazy. And really, how it started and how it works is that in our county, they've actually recently changed it. So one council member can serve up to 3 4-year terms on the council. So our current council member is in her second term. So in theory, she could run for a third if she wanted to. But she announced that she wasn't going to run again. And, I think thinking about what's happening at the federal level, thinking about how much work needs to be put in place to protect our people, protect the environment, protect against the rising costs that are being passed on to individual people, like all of those things are just a small snippet of why I was sort of encouraged to run and why I decided to do that, right? I think that we need real representation to be bringing solutions for our communities. And, in Anne Arundel County, there's never been a Latino in the county council providing that input into what's happening. Right now on our county council, there's nobody who comes from the environmental world and comes with that as their background. And that doesn't mean that good environmental legislation has not passed. There's been some great environmental legislation, and including my current council member led the plastic bag ban in our county. So, you can only get paper bags now. You have to pay 10 cents for them. There was a big pushback against that when it first started, and now everybody brings their own bags, and we've adjusted. We know how to go shop. But those are important things to bring. And it's my first time running for office. I don't think I knew how it worked, but I'm very lucky that I now have a campaign team of people with a lot of different backgrounds. I have a campaign manager who has worked for fundraisers in political campaigns before. He also has experience interning with a lobbyist here in the state. And I should clarify, even though he's interned with a lobbyist, there's no conflict of interest there. We did all of the background digging we needed to do. I have a PR and marketing person. I have a communications expert. I have a social media manager. And for all of us, we've been around political campaigns before. We've never run one ourselves. So there's been a learning curve. But really, it took me saying, I'm going to do this, right? And then asking some of the other people that I've known for years, how do I do it? And how do I make this happen? And it's been the best of times. It's been the worst of times. And it's a roller coaster, right? I mean, in one day, and this is the stuff that people don't talk about, right? Like in one day, you can have like the highest of the highs, but also the lowest of the lows. And so it's been such a journey, but it's taught me so much about myself, but also about the community that I live in, right? Like we've been out door knocking since like February or March. We've hit over 2,500 doors in our community. And I have to tell you, like every time we go out, I'm intimately learning more about a part of the area that I live in that I did not know before. I mean, I was knocking with my state delegate who has endorsed me the other day, and we were knocking in this community that was wooded. I didn't realize it was right on the water. So we walk up to this house and, she says, look out the front door, right? And you can literally see from the front door all the way through the house to the South River and like sailboats and like water right out the front or the back door of this house. And I knew where we were, but it just didn't click that we're right on the water and these are like waterfront homes, right? I found some great little, like, they call them pocket parks in the city of Annapolis, that are just like the end of a street. There's a little park and maybe a bench where you could sit down if you wanted to. It really has let me learn more about the area that I live in, let me learn what people really care about right now, and also find more people that are like very aligned with the values that I bring and the values that I hold dear, because sometimes building community feels difficult. Sometimes building community does not feel easy. And while this has pushed me out of my comfort zone in a lot of ways, it's also allowed me to just meet so many other like-minded people in my own community. And so it's been wild, it's been crazy, and it's been really, really great to get to know all of these things, more intimately, really.
I think it's so beautiful that you have lived in this area for most of your life or your whole life around the area. And yet here you are in the community that you want to represent and serve, and you're still learning something new. How refreshing. You identify as a queer, Latinx, Indigenous, transracial, international adoptee. Can you share a little bit with us about how your layered identities intersect with your run?
Yeah.
And additionally, I want to tag on to that if elected, you'd be the first Latino and openly gay member of the Anne Arundel County Council. What shifts with your representation?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think in terms of what I bring to the table, right? All of those identities bring just such a unique perspective in how I show up in spaces, right? Being a Latino means that whether I like it or not, I know what it's like to feel unwanted in spaces, to be racially profiled, to, maybe not be fully accepted for who I am in certain spaces. Being a transracial adoptee, right? It means that I've both built community with other people that look like me, with our Latino siblings, with our Black and African American siblings. And I also grew up in a white household. And so I understand race relations and dynamics in a way that I think is very unique. Because I've sort of lived in both of these separate communities that tend to be at odds with each other. Being openly LGBTQ, it means that I know what it's like to also be, unfortunately, discriminated against in those ways, right? But it also means that I'm fighting for everyone who does not feel seen and heard, or like they have representation in these communities. And the one thing I remind folks is that, when you're fighting for policies that benefit the most marginalized in our community, you're fighting for policies that benefit everybody. And that is sort of at the core of the message that I try to send home with this campaign. So, there is, I will say, pressure with potentially being the first Latino, being the first openly gay person, because, and I've heard the Speaker of the House, Jocelyn Pena-Melnick, she's the first Afro-Latina speaker here in Maryland. And I'm very honored that she decided last week when we were recording this to endorse my campaign. But she's said this before. She said, I don't take it lightly that I'm the first Afro-Latina leader of the House. And she's like, because I have to do so good at this job that the door remains open for another Afro-Latina to be speaker in the future. And so I know that if I'm running, I need to be at the top of my game, because if I don't do good, it means that door might close again. It's been how long, and we've never had a Latino in our county council. We've never had an openly gay person in our county council. And so it is a little bit on me to make sure that door remains open. for other people who want to do that in the future. And it's not lost on me also that representation is so important. I know what it's like to not see people like me in leadership making decisions at the local level. And so I think of like what young Joe would have loved to see, what young Joe would have, really needed in some of these times. And so there is a responsibility for me running and hopefully winning the primary election, but I'm doing the work, right? I'm doing the hard work to make that change possible.
Joe, you've been in environmental philanthropy, you've run LGBTQIA plus commissions, you've done adoption advocacy. Running for office is a different kind of exposure. What made now the right moment?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things that make now the right moment. I think one, and this is very broad, but we're seeing policies that really affect everyday people in a bad way coming out from the federal government. And I think now more than ever, our community members are really looking for somebody who is not the status quo politician to get into office and create meaningful change. And, while it remains a battle, right, of like establishment politics versus like young progressive people, we're seeing that change happen. And even in New York City, right, we're seeing Zoran Mamdani change the way that city is run. I mean, he closed a $12 billion deficit in the city of New York without cutting services or taxing everyday people more in his city, right? We're watching these policies form around young progressive people. I sort of was at a natural closing point in some of the nonprofits that I've led for a really long time. I served on the State Commission for LGBTQ Affairs for, 5 years, 6 years. The first 2 were as its first chair. And I was rolling off that commission. I also rolled off the board of Annapolis Pride in the fall. And so I found myself having more time to think about how I wanted to meaningfully represent and create change. And it felt like a natural progression for me to then take the next step. And I'm so glad I did, because like I said, I've really gotten to know more intimately a lot about the community that I live in. And I think people are ready for someone like me to bring a new perspective, even in Anne Arundel County, which, is not a super progressive county as a whole. It's still very purple, but we're looking for people that are fighting back about what's happening under this administration.
Your platform centers affordability, environmental education, public safety, and transparency. I know just from growing up in the DMV and from living in Maryland for, almost 14, 15 years now, that Anne Arundel County is under real development pressure. So affordable housing and environmental protection are often framed as trade-offs. So meaning, you can't have both. So in this context, you reject that. Why?
There's so many reasons why, and I'm glad you asked this question. And it's not a quick answer, so I want to frame that. But there's a couple of things. I'm going to start with a very recent report that came out from one of the county agencies. It's done by this woman named Pam Brown. She runs the Partnership for Children, Youth, and Families here in Anne Arundel County. And every few years, she does a report called Poverty Amidst Plenty. And it really looks at where our county services are maybe not meeting the needs of everyone in our county. And it starts with how many people are unhoused, how many people cannot afford to live in the county, but are here. And one of the things that it showed this year, it's technically a 2015 report, but this year is that in Anne Arundel County, we are about 12,000 affordable housing units short of where we need to be for our residents today. How do you make up that gap? How do you do that quickly enough where more people are not feeling the stress of the cost to rent a home? Buying a home even is not on the table for a lot of people in my generation, the millennial generation, and below me. I believe the average age of people buying their first home is now over 40 years old because people cannot afford it. And so when I frame this need for development, as a county, we have to make sure that everyone who wants to live in our county can. For our teachers, many of whom do not live in the county they work in. For our firefighters, many of whom do not live in the community that we work in. Our police officers, government workers even, many of them do not live here in the county. And so we need to make it affordable for them. If you need to build 12,000 units and you think about the traditional communities that are sort of in a lot of these spaces, they're big lawns, 1 acre, maybe even more than that, per house, per person. It's not going to be effective for us to develop those type of communities to house all of the people that need to live in our communities. And so when you talk about environmental protection in particular, it is on us to develop units that are mixed use, that are building up rather than building out, and that do meet the affordability crisis that we have. And so when you talk about environment, yes, it is very important that we're doing everything we can to protect the environment. And there are ways to develop that have less impact than building individual family homes for every single person that needs housing. When you talk about the development here in Anne Arundel County, there's a couple of solutions that I think really marry the need. And I'll talk about a couple of the other issues, but one of them is transit-oriented housing and transit-oriented developments. You have in Odenton, the MARC station here in Anne Arundel County. There are some new developments getting built there that have, apartments and shops and your grocery store and your doctors all in one area. And think about how great it would be if you didn't need a car to get to every single thing that you needed to get out to all the time. If you could walk right around the corner to a grocery store, if you could walk right around the corner to a park with green space, if you could walk to the MARC train to get into DC or Baltimore for work. Those are the type of solutions that we need. I think about in the northern part of Anne Arundel County, you have the light rail that goes into the city of Baltimore. And there's currently a housing project that is mostly funded by the state, actually, around affordability and affordable units in Cromwell is that area. Those are types of solutions that are needed. I think about the malls, many of which are unfortunately dying in our communities. Glen Burnie Mall is a great example. I used to go there, Marley Station Mall. I would go there with my grandmom to the movies when we were young. And I have some great memories there, but unfortunately, most of the anchor stores there are closed. There's nobody at the mall. That's a giant area of impervious surface that is sitting there basically empty. So what if you took that area and redeveloped it into a community? You're not creating any more environmental issues. And in theory, when you're developing it, you can implement better stormwater and green space solutions that actually will help the environment.
I've always wondered that, why not just take what's there and refab it? You can, in DC, so many of these empty building spaces are being converted into, well, luxury apartments that who knows who can afford those, but not
Yep.
me. But anyway, there is some kind of conversion happening. What's that resistance about? I don't understand.
I think people are scared of change, right? I think we're all scared. I mean, I get scared of change also, right? And we don't know what we don't know. I don't know what I don't know. And there's tension there. I mean, even here in Annapolis, where I live, there's a lot of new apartments getting built, many of which I would say are not very affordable, actually. And I hear a lot of people complaining about traffic. And I do think that traffic has gotten worse in the area that I live in. But the thing, and this is another statistic, right, is that in Anne Arundel County, 40% of traffic on our roads are because people have to come into or out of the county for their jobs. So if you're building housing in the places where people work, you will reduce the amount of traffic on our roads. And so I think about the Annapolis Mall, which actually is doing pretty well. It was just sold to a new group. There's a lot of new stores moving in there. But there are a couple of parcels that are empty, that are separate from the main mall. That includes the Sears. It used to be a Sears, and a Macy's that used to be there.
It's a large space. Those are two massive spaces.
Yes. And in Annapolis, Anne Arundel Medical Center is right around the corner from the hospital. You have bus routes that go from the mall into the city of Annapolis, but also into other parts of the county. They just started a bus route from the mall in Annapolis to the airport. So if you are traveling for work, you don't have to get an Uber. You don't have to go and pay for parking overnight. You can stop there and take the bus. So that would be a prime spot to build housing for maybe some of the residents or doctors that work in the hospital, or even if you had housing for people that work at the mall. Like those are all places that would reduce the amount of traffic on the road. And there's another interesting statistic. I've been talking with a group that does affordable housing, Anne Arundel Affordable Housing Coalition. This study showed that on average, when Anne Arundel County produced more than 500 new housing units a year, the average rent, it still went up, but it went up less than 2%. When the county generally produced less than 500 new units, the average rent went up more than 2% year over year. And so even if you're producing units that maybe are not the most affordable, it is still improving the housing need or the availability of housing in our community, where it doesn't allow people to keep raising the rent more and more and more every year. And so, yes, we need affordable units, but we really just need units in general. When you think about a 12,000 unit gap, it's going to take a long time to close that gap. So, yes, there's a lot of work to do, but there are solutions that will mean less stormwater runoff, less impervious surface, less people who need a car to get everywhere that they need to go to, less large properties on 1 acre of land that are trying to keep grass alive. Like, these are all things that can marry this pressure.
We talked a little bit about this before, and this was something that I found interesting because it's something that I just think about regularly, but it isn't anything I've ever had any kind of intersection with. And it's about your tree canopy work. That's a big part of your portfolio. Can you just talk a little bit about the tree canopy, quite literally the tree canopy, like the cover, like the tops of the trees that provide shade below them? What do communities lose? Well, first of all, what's happening to the tree canopy? Yeah. We'll start there.
So the tree canopy issue, there's a lot of things that are happening. One is that in a lot of areas, when trees get planted, they don't get maintained, right? And so, and we've seen this if you're familiar with nonprofits, you're familiar with environmental work, there's always money for implementation of new projects. There hardly ever is money for maintenance and ongoing support for projects. And so you see some really great ideas on paper that maybe get planted but are not maintained long term and carried out. You've seen, especially in some of the older cities, we live on the East Coast. A lot of our cities on the East Coast were built a long time ago. Green space was not at the top of the priority when cities were being developed. The big thing was to get people connected, to build housing, to get people to move around. And so from the start, a lot of cities were not very intentional about green space or trees. Now you have some cities that are not that norm. I mean, even in New York City, right? Somebody thought, oh, we need to make a big park in the middle of the city so people can have green space. But the other challenge in cities are that, a lot of trees are planted in tree pits or tree wells. And yeah, and so if you're ever like walking down a sidewalk in a city and you see a tree that kind of is in the middle of a concrete cutout, right? It's a cutout where the tree is growing. That is how a lot of trees are implemented in cities. And for a long time, we weren't giving the tree enough space to actually grow to its full potential, its full maturity. And that means that it's been hard, right, to like get meaningful tree canopy into cities itself. And then, talking about maintenance, but talking about natural disasters, when you're losing tree canopy, quite often it's not replaced right away. We're funding 5 groups in Puerto Rico right now, many of which are working with municipalities. And they've all said, oh, well, we lost all of these trees during Hurricane Maria almost 10 years ago now that have never been replaced, right? And so the canopy was not planned for when cities were developed. When you have new projects go in, they're not maintained. And then when you're losing trees from storms or other natural disasters, they're not getting replaced. And what you end up with are just areas that you have to walk around. It's all concrete or asphalt or buildings around you that can be 20 or 30 degrees hotter because of all of the concrete structures around them. And in Puerto Rico, actually, it's another example of the importance of tree canopy. It's very expensive for electricity in Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico actually burns diesel fuel as the way to produce energy. And so a lot of schools in Puerto Rico only have air conditioning in maybe the main auditorium or the main cafeteria. And the classrooms don't necessarily have air conditioning because it's too expensive to cool an entire school building. And so we're working with a group there, Centro de Apoyo Familiar, who is strategically planting trees next to school buildings so that it will keep them cooler in the summer. And it's hot in Puerto Rico. Like it's hot way longer throughout the year. But the kids were so excited. The kids are so excited. And they know that it's going to keep their classrooms cooler once the trees are at their full maturity. So, there's a lot of reasons why we're missing tree canopy, but the work of implementing it are so important for the communities that don't have air conditioning, don't have reliable electricity, just don't have relief from city life, right? They don't have that. So that's why the tree canopy work is so important.
You grew up and are very familiar with the spaces that you're committed to protecting. What are some layers and intersections of nature and the environment as it relates to Annapolis, Crownsville, and Millersville that you think are important to share?
When I think about the importance of nature and the environment in healing and mental health, those are things that are really important. One of the things that I think people that live in Annapolis know and that really runs deep in Crownsville is the history of slavery and the slave trade in our community. So Annapolis was a slave port. There's a famous statue called the Kunta Kinte or Alex Haley statue when you're down on City Dock. And, one of their family members, Chris Haley, is another important member in our community. And they have a festival to remember Kunta Kinte every year in Annapolis. And Chris Haley is a community leader. He actually also has endorsed my campaign, but who talks a lot about the importance of remembering that history and not forgetting it. And in Crownsville, which is also part of the district, there is the Crownsville Mental Hospital, which was an institution where, Black and African American folks went and, were not treated the way that they should have been. Many of them were experimented on. And unfortunately, many of them lost their lives there. And so there's a plan in place for Crownsville. It's called Crownsville Memorial Hospital now, to honor the natural environment while also honoring all of the folks that unfortunately lost their lives at that site. And so it's really important to think about how nature and the environment can also heal us, heal some trauma, heal generational trauma in particular, provides a space where when you're outdoors, you can, get the mental health, physical health benefits of being in the outdoors. And what I hope to see in that space and what I hope to see long-term is a place that honors the history, but also is like a community space outdoors where people can come together and do nature walks, go on a bike trail, go into the woods and bird watch and be in nature, because those are all really tied to the area that we live in here in Annapolis and in Crownsville.
Not everybody is into the environment or into environmental issues, not for any reason other than they just haven't had that intersection. What's a soft action that somebody like that could take?
I think the biggest thing and easiest thing is to get involved in your local area. It's really easy. There are many environmental nonprofits that might be doing a community event of some sort, might be hosting a walk through the woods, might be hosting a kayak where they provide all of that for you. Just look up environmental groups in your organization and see where you can plug in. I know so many people who just had that curiosity that now have found themselves in full-time roles doing environmental work. And all it takes is that little bit of curiosity to try something new, go to a new event, meet some new people, and get outside.
Joe, thank you so much for your time with me today and with the audience. Tell us how we can support your campaign.
Sure. So it's a people-powered campaign, which means that we need the support of people. So until the primary, which is on June 23rd, I'm going to be out there knocking every weekend. And if you decide you want to come out and knock, that's great. If that's not your jam, if you don't like going outdoor knocking, we could use help phone banking, calling people to let them know about my message. Or if none of those work, but you have a little bit of extra money, you're always welcome to donate to the campaign. And all of that information, volunteer forms, donation, it's on my website, which is joetoolan4anarundle.com.
Thank you so much, Joe.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
That's our show. This has been Amplify the People. If today's conversation moved you, the best thing you can do is get involved in your community. And if you want to support this work or apply for the Birders Fund Scholarship, you'll find everything at www.amplifythefuture.org. I'm Orietta Estrada. Take care of each other.